And I can tell you right now, the hardest thing I ever did, I put in robotics, I went digital, I had clean rooms, same technology that coats semiconductor chips, coats lenses. And I'm going to tell you, changing my ERP system was the most complex thing we ever did,
Yep.
the most difficult thing we ever did.
Yep.
And the cybersecurity portion of that is extremely important.
Growing a business requires a holistic approach that extends beyond sales and marketing. This approach needs alignment among people, processes, and technologies. So if you're a business owner, operations, or finance leader looking to learn growth strategies from your peers and competitors, you're tuned into the right podcast. Welcome to the WBS Podcast, where scalable growth using business systems is our #1 priority. Now, here is your host, Sam Gupta.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the WBS Podcast. I'm Sam Gupta, your host and principal consultant at digital transformation consulting firm Elevate IQ. The journey of serving the DoD market could feel frightening. While it might provide stability to your fluctuating revenue cycles, it also comes with significant overhead with the process upkeep. But as part of DoD compliance, you get several benefits, such as protecting your IP, as DoD is trying to protect your proprietary methods or patents. With these controls in place, professional investors will see your business as more sustainable if you decide to sell it. Finally, you could use these measures in your sales messaging to pass along some of those costs to your customers to rest assured that they are working with a financially stable vendor. In today's episode, we have our guest, Dale Parmenteri, who shares his insights into CMMC Preparedness and Assessment Nuances. He also provides practical advice to business owners about the real value of penetrating the DoD market and if the overhead is worth the hassle. Finally, he discusses several other concepts such as the importance of financial and cybersecurity control, the risk of running end-of-life applications and software, and the value of financial audits to increase the value of your business. Let me introduce Dale to you. Dale joined NEPIRC as Vice President of Consulting Operations in 2013. He is responsible for coordinating the delivery of NEPIRC staff services and deployment of NEPIRC resources strategically to aid regional manufacturers and supporting industry sectors in the areas of lean and continuous improvement, innovation and strategy, quality management systems, industry certification, sustainability, workforce development, and supply chain development. Dale and staff are committed to the success of the region's manufacturers and to aiding their leadership. Dale brings over 30 years of manufacturing experience in the region, serving as a partner and a principal in a local manufacturing firm, holding positions in finance, information systems, operations, marketing, and sales throughout his career. Prior to NEPIRC, Dale was most recently responsible for marketing his firm nationally and managing a regional sales force covering 7 states. In the early 2000s, he successfully automated his firm's manufacturing processes, incorporating robotics and conveyor systems. Dale hopes to share his experiences with regional manufacturers in an effort to help guide them to their own innovative solutions to their businesses. Dale served as a board member on the Optical Laboratories Association Board from 1999 to 2009 and is an American Board of Opticians certified speaker since 2003. In addition, Dale currently serves on the Luzerne County Industrial Development Authority, NEPA Moves Executive Committee, Iram Temple Restoration Project Board, and participates as a judge and mentor for the annual TechBridge Business Plan Competition. Dale is a graduate of Wilkes University, where he obtained a degree in business administration with minor studies in finance, information systems, and social sciences. He recently received his certificate of completion from the Sloan School of Management and Leadership at MIT and obtained his project management certificate at Penn State University. With that, let's get to the conversation. Hey, Dale, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Of course, my pleasure. And I am super excited to dig into your background. Obviously, you have had a fascinating background in growing your own manufacturing shop, and now you are helping other manufacturers complying with DOD regulations as well as CMMC. So it's going to be so exciting right now. Just to kick things off, do you want to start with your personal story and current focus, Dale?
I actually was placed from college in a local family-owned optical company. It was national. We did business in 40 states. I started in actually the finance department and then put the first PCs in. I wrote code early on in my career. These are, I hate to admit it, but this is before Excel, Word, and PowerPoint even existed. I was working with, DBase and different other products to basically massage information for our company. And that's kind of how I learned the eyeglass business, because we did have a manufacturing computer that everything was tied to and an ERP system. So that's kind of how I got my first taste of manufacturing. And I actually worked there for 31 years. Before I was 30 years old, they actually started to give me stock and a stock bonus plan. And I became an owner, ultimately a general manager and vice president. And I kind of was a jack of all trades, because I started in finance, went to information systems, became the controller. Then at the end of my career, because of changes in the family situation, I handled the marketing and the sales force. And our sales force was not in all 40 states. It was from Virginia to Massachusetts, is where we did about 85% of our business in that area. And then the other 15% was scattered over the rest of the country through online ordering, things like that. I left that company in 2012. We sold to Essilor France, same company that owns LensCrafters and Pearl now. They bought up a lot of laboratories throughout the country. I think they own about 30% of the laboratory capacity. And I was a client of the Northeast Pennsylvania Industrial Resource Center, or otherwise known as NEPERC, which is part of the NIST Manufacturing Extension Partnership System, which is a nationwide system of consultants that work with manufacturers in all industries in continuous improvement, growth services, supply chain, technology acceleration, and workforce development. Some of us even have loan funds where we actually loan them money, which we happen to be one of those entities as well, because we go back to 1988.
Okay, some amazing background. And I especially going to love your finance background, because when I have these discussions with manufacturers, they tend to have slightly different perspective of how the controllership should be done in the manufacturing organization. And since you have sort of owned and ran the regulated manufacturing organization, in my experience, running a regulated manufacturing organization versus the non-regulated manufacturing organization is a different ball game. It's a different ball game from the finance perspective, from the compliance perspective. And sometimes these manufacturers, especially the mom and pop shop, they don't even know what kind of risks they are sitting on. And these are substantial financial risks. So we are going to dig into all of that. But before we do that, we have one of the standard questions, and that is going to be, Dale, your perspective on business growth.
I happen to be a closet economist. When I officially retire, one of my dreams is to teach macroeconomics in college, just ad hoc. I just love macroeconomics. I'm a big Bloomberg fan. Yep. Watch it all day long in the office, watch it in the evening. I like to see what's going on in the world and how it's affecting. And I happen to be one of those folks that raise the tides so all boats rise. I believe that if economic conditions improve worldwide, it's best for the U.S. when that happens. And so I kind of tend to work from that end of the economic philosophy. As far as growth goes, I got to tell you, with the infrastructure that's already been put in place, some of the stimulus, and now the infrastructure bill that looks like it's going to go through, there's definitely going to be growth in our economy over the next year or two, no question about it. The question is going to be is what's the size of that growth? Because there's also pent up demand that happened during the pandemic last year. I went from the average client being down 25 to 30% last year to towards the end of the year, now being up 10, 20, 30% and having significant issues with on-time delivery because of supply chain. And it doesn't matter what industry that I'm working in, plastics, metals, food, doesn't matter. Auto, doesn't matter. All industries are having supply chain issues right now. There's no question. So that is going to put some damper on growth, but they're talking about growth being 7%. So maybe growth is going to be 4.5. Not sure, but these are growth numbers that the U.S. hasn't seen in decades. I believe back from the 70s and 80s, they haven't seen that kind of growth. So I do expect the economy to grow, and that is sometimes a barrier for the subject that we're talking about, because when people are busy, they don't tend to focus on their risks and things that are going on. They tend to focus on getting work out the door, and that does create some challenges.
Yeah, so we are definitely going to have similar interests here. I am a big fan of macroeconomics as well, to be honest. In fact, my friends typically ask me, given a choice, would you rather go to a beach or would you rather, read an economics book? And I would probably choose the economics book just because it's just so much fun, to be honest. I could come across as a dry person. I'm okay with that because I just love it so much. By the way, on that note, if you really understand the macroeconomics well, in my opinion, I think you could be a very strong business leader, because then you are going to have this holistic perspective of how economy works, how people think, how they behave, what drives them. Okay, so now let's come into our today's topic, which is going to be planning for CMMC. And this is a different world altogether, as we were talking about regulated versus non-regulated. And when companies are going for the CMMC journey, that is probably going to be the highest regulation and the highest process-centric compliance they can probably imagine. But at the same time, it is probably going to be equally expensive as well. So let's say if the SMB manufacturers are trying to go for the journey of CMMC, how can they plan for it, in your experience?
Well, just based a comment on what you just said, we deal in the food industry, and they're probably the most regulated of anything right now, the food industry. And I'm not talking about just cybersecurity. I'm talking about food safety and defense. There's two things that NIST, our federal stakeholder, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, two things that they've pointed out to us: food safety and defense, they want us to focus on, and cybersecurity. And they're from the same reasons. It's a crazy world we live in these days. And having food safety and defense and having cybersecurity are now costs of doing business. We just have to do it. I will tell you, it's a challenge when it comes to cybersecurity to get non-DoD clients to take it seriously. They don't have to put anywhere near the controls in that a DoD client has to put in, but they still have their head stuck in the sand. That's the last thing they're thinking about is their cybersecurity. And it is a challenge for us. But in the DoD space, it's not as much a challenge, because these folks now are being required in their contracts to have certain level of either security, or they have to have a POAM, a plan of action and milestones of when they are going to get there. And where this all started is our federal stakeholder, NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology. The cybersecurity standard that's out there is called NIST 800-171. And that, depending on the DoD client that you are, depends on how many controls you have to have in place. So as far as planning to go into a cybersecurity, and the first thing you do, and the easiest part of all of this, is a gap assessment. You have to have a gap assessment to see what you have in hardware, software, how many employees you have, who has access to. It's very important, because you have to train everyone that has access to your internet and your and external and internal and external. So you have to, how many people you have is a major part of the cost. But I can tell you a gap assessment normally costs around $1,000.
Yeah.
So just to find out where you're at, you're going to have to spend about $1,000 just to find out where you're at. Now, depending on what part you make, if you're in the DoD business and you just make, say, maybe a simple ball bearing, you may not need, that's not a critical or unique product. You may be able to be at level 1 and only have 18 controls in place. And when I say level 1, I'm starting to talk about what came after NIST 800 171, the CMMC, which is a cybersecurity maturity model certification. That added another 20 controls, but they have stages in CMMC. Stage 1, I believe, is 18 controls, and that stage is the least expensive to get into. And if you're producing a part, so a OEM could have 3 DoD suppliers. One of them only needs 18 controls, and the other 2 might need the 130 controls for CMMC. But what I can tell you, the majority of my clients, and we'll get into what sectors they're in, the majority of my clients fall into level 3 or higher, which means even the small metal fabricators, they need to have the 130 controls because of what they're working on. They could be working on the F-35. They could be working on missile guidance systems. They could be working on drones, things like that. But they have to have those 130 controls, and there is a cost associated with that. After you have an assessment, what normally takes place is there's penetration testing from the party. We use a third party to do our cybersecurity installations and implementations. They will do penetration testing depending on the size of your company. And I do have some stories on some of the companies and sizes of them. Based on the size of your company, that penetration testing and setting up the software controls that you need to put in place and stuff like that can run from anywhere from a few thousand to $10,000-$12,000 to do that portion of the project. And then after that, you have to have monthly monitoring. And monthly monitoring, again, depends on how many people have access, how many remote devices have access, and there's a lot of factors in that. And the monthly monitoring can range anywhere from, with my clients, from $1,000 to $3,000 a month. So when you look at it, you could be looking at your first year. This could be a $30,000 to $50,000 expense, and then $30-some thousand a year, or $20-some thousand a year thereafter. But as a former business owner, I look at it as like hiring an employee. I don't have the ability to hire that many employees to do this on site and task them with that. I feel it's better to use a certified third party because there are specific cybersecurity certifications. So I would recommend, when looking at it, don't necessarily default to the people that work with your website or your current network. They may not have the proper certifications to do CMMC. And the folks that do have those proper certifications, there's less of them out there, and they can be more expensive, but you get what you pay for. And as a former business owner, I had 140 employees at one time, about a $20 million business a year revenue. I want to sleep at night. And I can tell you right now, the hardest thing I ever did, I put in robotics. I went digital. I had clean rooms, same technology that coats semiconductor chips, coats lenses. And I'm going to tell you, changing my ERP system was the most complex thing we ever did, the most difficult thing we ever did. And the cybersecurity portion of that is extremely important. And we did have an outside party that basically provided the software scripts and programming for our ERP system and our cybersecurity protections, because we just wanted to make sure the people we were using had the right certifications and that way I could sleep at night. So then in turn, what you have to do is, if you can, I know some of the DoD contracts allow for you to pass that cost along, but many of them don't. Many of them don't. Now, as a private, doing in private industry, for those clients, I would pass it along in a price increase to them. And even if I had to educate them, as this is so that we keep both our data safe and that we keep our business relationships safe, I am taking the added on expense. I would probably publicize it to my clients that we are taking a proactive approach to have cybersecurity to protect both of us. Because you all know Target, I believe Target got hacked by the HVAC repairman's laptop. I think that's the legend. I'm not, but that, so you can get hacked from anywhere. Outlook is one of the biggest areas where hacks come from, is through Outlook, and most of us use Outlook these days.
Yeah, so I am going to have tons and tons of clarifying questions, and this discussion is going to be so fascinating because obviously, we want to make sure the business owners are getting the right advice, what is going to be best for them, right? So I'm going to have some clarifying questions here. So let's say if somebody wants to vet CMMC provider who is going to be certified versus non-certified, as you know, Dale, there is a lot of noise in the market, and sometimes when sales people are going to be there, they don't even know what they are talking about. And they are probably not going to commit on the contract. Hey, CMMC certified, I have it all. You are all covered, you're all good. Now, if you look from the business owner perspective, they don't really understand, to be honest, how to vet these guys. So let's say if I'm the business owner and I'm trying to find out, Dale, you are coming to me versus an IT guy is coming to me. IT guy is claiming that, they are CMMC certified and they can help me with all of the certification requirements, including my penetration testing, including providing all of the documentation that you are going to need. And then I am going to take this documentation to you to get the certification, and you are going to tear this off and throw it in the trash because, because that's not really certified. So let's say if you were to vet an IT provider who's claiming that they are certified body, how can you vet them?
Well, we do ISO certifications here. So most folks have it's almost like having a diploma. You have that. So I would require documentation from the vendor. A lot of them will put in a lot of them that are certified, they publicize it. And the current one we have, I don't even know what all the letters stand for behind his name, but there were several different certifications that he has. He and his staff have. And I did require to have documentation of that. And that's more than just him saying what they have. It's a certificates. There's certificates for that certification. So I know that they could be faked and things like that, but you have to have a certain level of trust as well. But I would require some form of documentation for that. A lot of times there's sites you could go out and verify their registration.
Okay, amazing. Love it. And the other comment that you had made related to ball bearing, some tiny part not being as critical, and that will require, let's say, just 18 controls, and that could have your level 1. But let's say if you are working on slightly more critical part, then they are going to require slightly more sophisticated processes, right? So let's say if I'm the business owner and I'm trying to figure out, whether I'm going to fall into level 1 versus level 3, what are some of the guidelines that you might be able to tell? How do they describe the criticality of the part? Is it based on the part, whichever part it is going in the aircraft? Is it based on that or something else?
It's really based on IP. If it's like if a ball bearing, the reason I use that is many people make ball bearings. And it's not a secret technology. So it's technology-based IP. So if it's a part, if it's something that's unique and it's got if it's something that say Lockheed Martin says, I want you to make this, and it's proprietary. So it has to do with proprietary and IP, like if this fell into hands of a foreign country, what could they do to us? Could they reverse engineer our aircraft or things like that? Whereas the ball bearing itself is not that critical to that discussion. So it basically comes down to what part you're producing and how it's used, and how confidential it is. If it's I know we're really talking about CUI here. unclassified information, basically controlled unclassified information. But some of these parts and things like that, they just do not want how they're made to become knowledge to get out to foreign countries, or maybe even other providers or competitors, even other U.S. competitors, meaning like Lockheed Martin doesn't want General Dynamics to see how we make it, that type of thing. So it really comes down to what you're making. And I use the ball bearing because that is a simple thing that's common in many different industries. It's not going to be that proprietary or high technology item that someone is going to benefit by knowing how that ball bearing is made.
Interesting. So basically what I am hearing here is you are actually trying to protect me because that is my IP as well. If you think about it, because if it gets in somebody else's hand, then I'm probably screwed.
This is being driven from the lock. I'll be frank with you. Most of the CMMC and the NIST 800-171 discussions were actually pushed and driven by companies like Lockheed Martin and General Dynamics, which we happen to have local facilities that we work with here. And General Dynamics told us that they have over, and this is years ago, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, they said they have over 1,000 malicious attacks a day. So they're really the ones that are even pushing this more because they want the protection. So really what you're doing is you're being, by contract, forced to protect them and their products and what you make for them. So it is protecting you too. But the beauty is what you put in place is not only going to protect your DoD business, it'll protect all your business.
Exactly, because that's your IP as well, right?
Right, absolutely. So going through the process, I would definitely have been an early adopter. I joined here 8 years ago, so I was out before NIST 800-171 or CMMC existed. We did have a certain level of cybersecurity, but 8 years ago, cybersecurity was a different level of concern than it is today. It's just ramped up even more. But a lot of this is basically being driven down by contracts, and the OEMs are determining, or they're determining this is what is important and not, and that's really what it's coming down to.
Yeah. So let's talk about some of the example of the process. So let's say if I'm the business owner and I'm really trying to understand, what are the examples of these 18 processes versus the, I don't know whether you said 300 or 130 controls. 130 that you need at the level 3. So let's say as a business owner, if I'm trying to understand what are going to be some of the examples, can you provide some examples? Maybe if you have a story that you might be able to share.
The controls are complicated. I could, there's a lot. The basic 18 controls up front have to deal with your VPNs, your route, your firewalls, things of those nature, and it's basic cybersecurity. The majority of the other controls, and there's quite a few of them. To be frank with you, I couldn't name them all to you off the top of my head, but they get into things like remote access with from your phones and your laptops. You've got you have to have phishing emails sent to people just to test them. So you have software that you have to install that actually protects you for some of these things. So a lot of the controls are evolved around the mitigation that you have to do. And there is a cost to that. Often the cost that I gave you before have to do with additional software and firmware or things like that. You did have a question in prep for this, that does it often mean that you have to replace legacy systems? We tend to deal with a lot of small companies. We were established to work with companies between 10 employees and 500. Yes, we do have some Lockheed and Procter & Gamble, and we have Toby Hanna Army Depot. They have thousands of employees, but the majority of our clients are under 150 employees. They tend to be the folks that have to replace legacy systems, things like that. So there can be some additional costs, but most often the folks that we work with are working with their existing equipment and they're adding these software controls. So there is a certain amount of it that gets added no matter what system that you have, but there have been occasions that some folks have had to upgrade. not only upgrades. I mean, there's people out there still not using Office 365, things like that. So people will have to end up upgrading certain softwares just so they can go through this process, in addition to the software that has to be installed for the CMMC controls.
Okay, very interesting. So I think this is a point where I am going to connect a lot of different dots, because there is a conversation that I want to definitely have with you. So when you talk about these hardware and the software and VPN and firewall, these things are slightly easier in my experience, because at least you can see them, you have the IP address associated with them. But when you get into slightly more application centric issues where you are going to have your SOX compliance and who is actually seeing your financial data inside your organization, in your supply chain, as well as probably externally, you are exposing some of this data to your external partners as well. Now, if you talk to my average mom and pop manufacturer, that is going to be 5, 10, 25, $50 million, they don't really appreciate the cost accounting. They probably don't appreciate the planning aspect of the manufacturing organization. And since you have such a deep finance background, and you understand how SOX compliance can really affect your organization overall, from the cybersecurity perspective, also from the financial control perspective. And there is also a conversation when you are going to have, let's say, your isolated systems, your SOX compliance is going to be far more difficult to manage in your infrastructure. And Dale, since you have already sold your company, I don't know, you are probably investing your money right now. I mean, I personally would not invest in a company that does not really manage the SOX compliance, because that is there for a reason. None of the professional investors are ever going to invest their money unless you have the SOX compliance in place. But your average mom and shop does not really get it. So now the question I have for you is going to be, overall, why the SOX compliance is obviously going to be difficult if you don't have that integrated system, integrated ERP system. If your operations arm of the manufacturing is going to be disjointed from your financial arm, you are not going to be able to do the actual cost accounting that you probably need to be able to do your manufacturing. But overall, from the DoD perspective, I guess you probably need that integrated application. Otherwise, you are going to have a lot of challenges, right?
Yes. And I can tell you, some of the smaller clients, and I'm talking about people with 15 to 20 employees, they actually look at this and they evaluate, how much DoD business do I have?
Yeah.
And is it worth doing this?
Yeah.
I've actually had clients say, you know what, for the amount of DoD we have, we're just going to step away from it.
Yeah.
That's not the norm, but that happens because of what you just said. They don't have that critical infrastructure in place. They might be using QuickBooks.
Yeah.
And it's not, and they may have a lot of our clients have MRP systems.
Yeah.
The smaller ones, as opposed, we actually help them install them. And some clients, getting them to an MRP system is a big step up, from where they were. But the majority of our clients that are in the DoD space,
yeah,
they're 50, 75 to 100 employees. They tend to have more sophisticated systems. They have ERP systems. Some of them are Oracle.
Yeah.
So they've got some of that protections that, I was Unix and Oracle, which was great. Nobody messes with Unix. Now I'm going back.
Yeah.
Now it would be Linux and Oracle, but going way back, that nobody's hacking those systems at that time. They weren't messing with it. They were trying to go to the low-hanging fruit with Windows and Novell and all those different types of networks that were out there. They weren't looking at the Unix Oracle system of an optical lens manufacturer. They weren't going at it. But sometimes, to your point, sometimes that information has to be addressed, and it does cause people to either add it or isolate it.
Yeah.
Or have to isolate it. So it does create a dilemma sometimes for some of these smaller companies. Do we go all in or do we back out?
So in your experience, let's say if we are talking about these businesses that don't want to go for DoD just because of the cost implications, and they are thinking that, it's probably not worth it. But the processes that are designed for DoD, they are designed to protect you, a lot of them, to be honest. If you want to have a sustainable business that you want to sell to a professional investor, they want to have all of this regardless. So if you do this right now, then your business value is actually going to increase, right? So in your experience, let's say, I mean, if you're talking about less than $5 million shop, then let them run manually. To be honest, I would probably not worry about any technology whatsoever, unless they want to get into DoD. Then it's a different case. But let's say if somebody's running 10, 15, 20, and they have aspiration to grow, then they should be thinking about this, even if, let's say, they are not trying to go to DoD, because things like SOX compliance is absolutely critical, in my opinion, to have the financial control in your organization. Otherwise, you are going to struggle. What do you think about that?
I as a former business owner, and I was a small company, but
Yeah.
I would want to have the maximum protection. If I was ever hacked and I didn't have the maximum protection, I would feel that I failed my team and my clients. So I would be on that. And again, I would have, if I were in that situation back when I owned the business, I would have publicized that I am trying to not be target. I'm trying to protect. It is going to, the slight price increase you might be seeing that I'm passing along, it's because I'm protecting both of us. I would have tried to turn it into a positive as to why we're doing this and help me separate myself from my competitors. Because that's what I did when I went to digital lenses and put in automation. I was an early adopter. It was expensive to be an early adopter, but I also was able to gain market share because I was doing those technologies. And I think in some ways you can make cybersecurity, if you've got to pass the cost along to your client, which you probably would have to, because nobody's got margins that they can just keep eating into their margins. I would make a narrative as to this is what we're doing to protect both of us. And I think clients would appreciate that and say, hey, you know what? I get it. I've had 7 non-DoD clients, at least they admit, the ones that I know that admitted it.
Yeah.
I have 7 that were ransomed within the last year. And these are companies that range from 50 employees to over 1,000. And they were ransomed. I don't know how much they all paid, but they all paid to get their access to their data. So you could be penny wise or pound foolish. It's got to be awful embarrassing to tell your clients you're shut down for a week or two because you don't have access to your data because you got hacked. You could also lose customers because they got to go somewhere else in the meantime.
Exactly. Not only that, I think, if I'm dealing with a vendor that has been ransomed, then that's a huge risk for me. I'm not working with them. So in my opinion, I think that's a huge negative PR for the companies that you don't have your game up. You need to figure your game out because of you, now I am probably going to lose my contract because, if you look at the manufacturer is almost like a value chain that, okay, who are you working with? If you're working with this vendor, I don't want to work with you. And by the way, one of the other points that you mentioned related to utilizing these certifications as part of your marketing, this is something not a lot of manufacturers do. For example, let's say if you are SOX compliant, if you are getting your books audited by a professional auditor, then that could be a huge, huge plus for you. You can win much larger contract because, people are going to be confident that, somebody else is actually looking at your books, somebody else is looking at your business. So not only they are teaching you how to do business and finance in the right manner, the way it is supposed to be done, you are actually adding far more value to your customer that you can be risk-free because I am doing number 1, number 2, and number 3 to protect you, to protect our own employees, to protect our own customers. So that's a huge point in my opinion.
Yeah, and to point to as far as when it comes to DoD, that poem I mentioned before, plan of action and milestones. There's a lot of folks, when you put that in the first time, you have a negative number because you're so far away from compliance.
Yeah.
It's not, from a DoD standpoint, they'd rather see a negative number than nothing there. Because if they see nothing there, they assume you're doing nothing. So I'm serious. So we've actually advised clients, it's better to go through the process, have a negative number there and show that you have a plan of action and you'll be compliant by this time frame. They're going to have more confidence in working with you that you're working on it than someone who has a 0 there. They're going to immediately assume these folks haven't addressed it. And so, it's kind of counterintuitive that a negative score is better than 0, but in this instance, it is. And it's important to have that in place. But as you pointed out before, too, whatever you do for DoD is going to protect all your business. And if I'm an auditor today, in the notes in the financial sections of your audit, I would be addressing cybersecurity. That would be a note to the financials. If there's no cybersecurity controls, or there's no contract with a third party, I know you mentioned you had a question about cloud. It doesn't matter if you're in a cloud or not. You need to have these protections. You can't rely on your cloud provider to have all these protections. You need to have these protections in place as well. You need to address it.
That's a very interesting point. I never thought that auditors are actually going to look for the cybersecurity as well. That's amazing. That's really good.
They should be. They're supposed to put down notes in your financials as to what your business risks are.
Interesting.
I would think now one of your biggest business risks is if you're not a foods provider. I would think one of your biggest business risks is your data.
Yeah.
Your IP. It's why lots of companies are now reshoring, because they've had years of having their IP stolen. That's one of the reasons people reshore their company. The others is because of cost. The major reason is because costs are now leveling out. And that's why jobs have been coming back to the U.S. since 2007-8. Manufacturing jobs have been coming back and to Europe as well and other industrialized nations. But, I would think that right now, cybersecurity is one of your bigger risks in a business that you could have. I mean, obviously, you want to do things like active shooter training. And, obviously, with the pandemic, we have to have proper training for that with those risks. But the cybersecurity risk is not going to go away. And I don't care if you're in the cloud or not. If I were running my own organization, I would have redundant systems. I'd have my own hardware on the floor, and I'd also be in the cloud. Because if you want to run, you want to run 24/7, you've got to have redundancy, but that's costly to be redundant.
So let's say I'm actually going to address just the last question on the list, which is going to be, overall perspective on the cloud versus maintaining your own infrastructure, especially when we talk about some of the modern versus slightly more legacy organizations. They have their own perspective, especially if you talk about defense-centric organizations. They are going to have their own fears and insecurities in terms of how they want to do things, right? So let's say if I have the cloud providers which are providing you the cloud-based systems, they are also assuring that the machines that they are providing are already CMMC certified. Now, as the auditor, would you trust these guys? Would you trust their certification? And if, let's say, the major business applications and the machine and the equipment, if they are already compliant with the CMMC, my assumption is going to be the only thing I really need to worry about is going to be my own probably tiny mini network that I have and maybe devices. But my overall effort is going to be far lower if I have the cloud. My expenses are not going to be as high. So what would be your perspective overall in terms of trusting these guys as CMMC certification compliance and then reducing the amount of effort overall because they are on cloud now?
The current thought is if you're in the cloud, you're more protected than if you have your own systems on the floor.
Yeah.
I sometimes have trouble with that. I'm not sure. Like I just said to you, I would be redundant. I would have everything on site, servers, everything that I could, but I would also be backing up to the cloud every day. That's kind of what we did in my company. When we went to the cloud, I sold it before NIST 800-171 existed. And we did not do DoD business at that point back then. So it wasn't as big of an issue. Although when we did back up to the cloud, we still had redundant servers. But when Essilor bought us, they got rid of all of our redundant servers. And they just went strictly cloud. So they were French owned and they had a different perspective. My personal perspective is have as much redundancy as you can so that you can, especially if you're running 24 hours a day, you need that. You can't. Now, some contracts for Department of Defense are very long.
Yeah.
So if you were down a week, it's not the end of the world. But my average order had to be done same day or within 3 days. You can't do that. You got to still be able to run. Most of the folks that we have right now have cybersecurity work with are in the metal fabrication or the plastics industry. We have one that's actually an integrator. They're an ABB distributor and a universal robotics distributor, but they happen to make drones for the DoD. So they're going through this process. All of them are cloud-based. All of them are cloud-based. One of them does have redundant systems on site. So they've gone in that direction. And the cybersecurity company that we use, they're well adept of dealing with both situations.
Okay, amazing, Dale. So that's it for today. Do you have any last-minute closing thoughts or advice?
My advice to those of you that are CEOs and CFO, and I know the CFOs never want to spend the money, but don't be penny wise, pound foolish. Look at it as you're hiring a production employee. Get your third party, but look at it as I'm hiring an employee. The cost of doing this is like hiring someone to protect me and to protect my customers and to protect my livelihood. And don't wait too long because it's got to be. I've never been in this situation, but the 7 companies I talked to, it was very embarrassing, and not only very embarrassing, it was a very stressful time while they were ransomed. So I would not delay. I would get an assessment, at least go that far right now to find out what are your gaps. That's the first step I would take.
Yeah, I completely agree. And my personal takeaway from this conversation is going to be, as a CFO, if you are the financial executive of the organization, your responsibility is not just to manage books. Your responsibility is also cover all of the risks that your organization might face. So number one, what you need to do is, you need to understand your business at a much deeper level and then assess all of. And, it just costs $1,000 to do the gap assessment. And even if you are not doing DoD, but it's worth exploring what kind of risks you might have in your business. On that note, Dale, I really want to thank you for your time. This was a powerful episode.
Yeah. And last thing I would say is I do believe this is going to go beyond DoD eventually. We do ISO certifications here, and there's a lot of companies that can't do business unless they have that ISO certification. I firmly believe down the road, companies to deal with other companies are going to want to see a certain level of cybersecurity. I know it's starting with DoD, but I do believe that this is going to turn into something that is going to be a requirement for all of business going forward eventually.
Yeah, and I agree. I think there is a greater push overall for the financial audits as well. We have seen 5 years back, I would not see in very inexpensive deals, but now if you look at my market, I mean, a lot of them are asking for the financial audit. So that's actually going to happen in the manufacturing as well.
Right. And if your CPA is going to be looking at your risks and putting notes in your financials that could affect whether you get financing, it's best to if they do it now, they're not an early adopter. A lot of people have been doing this. So some of the costs have come down, but the bottom line is don't kick this can down the road. You'll regret it.
All right. Thank you so much, Dale. Really appreciate you.
All right. You take care.
I cannot thank our guests enough for coming on the show, for sharing their knowledge and journey. I always pick up learnings from our guests, and hopefully you learned something new today. If you want to learn more about Dale, head over to nepirc.com. Links and more information will also be available in the show notes. If anything in this podcast resonated with you and your business, you might want to check other related episodes, including the interview with Laurie Navin, who discusses the differences between the aerospace industry's new product development and product improvement projects. Also, the interview with Angela Thurman, who discusses the process for supplier capacity and quality planning. Also, don't forget to subscribe and spread the word among folks with similar backgrounds. If you have any questions or comments about the show, please review and rate us on your favorite podcasting platform or DM me on any social channels. I'll try my best to respond personally and make sure you get help. Thank you, and I hope to catch you on the next episode of the WBS Podcast.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the WBS Podcast. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcasting platform so you never miss an episode. For more information on growth strategies for SMBs using ERP and digital transformation, check out our community at WBS.rocks. We'll see you next time.